Alright, Game and Compute. What is up, guys? So just a little update here. So I'm pretty aware that, people aren't super interested in these daily episodes. So I've got maybe a few that I might post. I might not post them, but, in all honesty, I've had a summer of not really being able to figure out, not really that I can't figure it out or that I haven't figured it out, but I haven't really looked into it or really taken the initiative or effort to really dive into things, look into the analytics, look into kind of a more niche down approach. I've kind of been scattered and definitely all over the place. But as September is already a kind of milestone month for me this year in 2023, I'm like, let me just get back to the roots. So this podcast started back in, I believe it was November of 2020. And at that time, we were at the end of the year, not at the end of the year, at the end of the year that the pandemic was kind of announced. So we were sitting through the Rona. I can't remember exactly if we were all kind of stuck at home then. My mind is so foggy about what was going on at that time, but I do remember around maybe just before summer that year, things were already getting more and more isolated, and so I'm gonna assume that by November, because I know we'd already started the distancing a little bit before May. I want to say it was March or something. I really can't remember, but so I'm pretty sure by November of 2020 we were already kind of locked down, and everyone was kind of in a panic. And originally I started this content talking about topics that were things that I was experiencing, things that people seemed kind of interested in. And we've had some changes with the platforms, with things with Anchor and going into Spotify for podcasters, and some issues with the algorithms and whatnot. But yeah, that first month was going pretty good. And last night I was like, I'm up, let me work this through, because it's not like I don't know what I'm doing. It's more so that I've just been posting whatever, because I'm like, well, the platform's here. I'd rather post anything rather than posting nothing. So part of me is debating if I'm even going to go back and just take down all those daily episodes, because it's been most of the summer I've been posting those. I think I started posting them in May of 2023, I guess, on here. And, they didn't get much traction. It didn't really help any of the ratings or anything. And it's well, if you guys aren't really into it, it's kind of a waste of effort and time to, post them on here, to kind of upload them on here. It's kind of well, why upload them? And I kind of get a little not interested. The reason why I started doing them is because I know I get a little rambly. And so my purpose initially for posting those was to kind of put all the rambling into one type of episode, and then, have a more focused episode that kind of had an actual topic, niche-based topic, not just oh, these are the random things that happened today or yesterday or whatever. So I'm gonna get back to, those topics. So, it's a bit of an evaluation process. I started it. I've talked about it a little bit before, but it's been in the works. But I've been trying to get my energy together to be able to do it. And so I think I might have hit that point, at least another stage of that point. Last night I was up late and I was just like, let me work on this because I'm already up and I'm not sleeping. So let me just go through all the data that I have. And so I kind of know what people want to hear. I already knew, but it's like I've kind of just ignored it and just been like, whatever. So I'm going to get us back to our roots and, post kind of closer to the original stuff that I started posting back between the whole year of like November 2020 through November 2021. People tended to like that content, and so I'll probably just keep things along those lines. There were still multiple like subcategories to kind of go with, but in all honesty, I hadn't really been too reflective on the stuff I've been doing in those areas. I've just been kind of putting the energy into doing it, learning things, and then just move on with the day. I haven't really been like talking about it too much. So evaluation processes can be hard. It can be hard to like change something into another thing, and to be more focused, because for me it can be a little bit difficult. So with that in mind, I'm gonna use that to preface that, I'd like to talk about this topic of work satisfaction. So with work satisfaction, job satisfaction, career satisfaction, the tasks you find yourself doing every day for work to make money, that can vary. Like, a lot of us, at least in the millennial generation and like beforehand, a lot of us were kind of taught, go to school, get good grades. After high school, it got to a point where after high school, a lot of people would go to college. And, historically, college wasn't always open to everybody, but there also wasn't this like necessity for it. Or people would go into trades, and there was a lot of other like racial stuff going on where it wasn't like too cut and dry of like, okay, I want to have this, I want to go and, have this education, like not everybody had to do that. Like maybe they could go to college, get a 4-year degree, get a bachelor's and be fine. Or they could go to a trade school and be fine. Or they could graduate high school and just start working at a company and work their way up from there. That wasn't so uncommon if we think about like the 50s and whatnot. But then back then it wasn't as maybe equal for people to be trying to get into schools. Like I'm trying to shy away from the political aspects of things, but when it comes to education and money, it's kind of hard to take the politics out of it, because when you take that zoom out approach and you just look at society, it's like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of racial and ethnic and, cultural things that are happening. So it's like, it's hard to really be like, okay, we're just not going to look at that and treat everybody like they've all been treated equally. But without diving into like the different subcultures, if we talk about, the mainstream American, leave it to Beaver style, society, everything kind of looked the same, right? And this is like before the Vietnam War. This is like, like things were kind of portrayed like of course there was poverty, of course there was, racism, of course there were laws that like supported racism. All those things existed, like and once the 60s came, things started getting stirred up more. So one complaint that a lot of maybe non-counterculture people had in the 60s was that, people who didn't want to work were lazy. People who didn't want to work or go to like a mainstream educational program and then get placed in work, people who didn't want to do that, who were, either considered hippies or whatever, or were a part of this counterculture that was kind of, in protest against how society was kind of doing things with the inequality, with the, everybody kind of looking cookie cutter the same, individuality before this wasn't really, cherished. It seemed to be kind of like almost like a superficial society where it was like, go to school, get a job, have, a wife and a husband, have like maybe two kids and a dog and a white picket fence kind of thing. Like I remember learning about I always mix it up if it's called nuclear or nuclear. I don't know. Oh, let me see. I gotta look this up. I gotta figure out how to okay, so yeah, the nuclear family, a couple and their dependent children, regarded as a basic social unit. So, I remember learning about the nuclear family in school. Like, I don't know if they even like teach about that anymore. Like, I have no idea what actually goes on too much about that kind of stuff right now. But yeah, I remember learning about the nuclear family, and like everyone was like, this is kind of the goal to, have this 9 to 5 in this nuclear family. You start work at this time, your kids start doing these different phases of these things at these times. They graduate at these times and repeat the cycle of what they learned from their parents, and then the parents retire at these times, and the wife does this job and the husband does that job. And it was very like just cookie cutter, like there wasn't like a lot of deviation from that. But when there was like a counterculture that set in, and there have been many types of counterculture movements, and in the 60s that was coming up, and there was a war going on with Vietnam and other countries involved over there, and there was just this just a lot of things changing all at once around that time, and people who were the younger generations were not really interested in that whole, future that was pre-planned for them to be like, hey, we're just gonna go have our family and go get this house and have a white picket fence with my kids and this dog and a cat, and once we're done raising them at 18, they're gonna move out and get a house, and after college, and get married, and just follow this whole method. They were kind of not into that. They felt like it was soulless, like it was like, there's not a lot of passion behind it. It's just work until you retire. It doesn't matter what your heart says. It doesn't matter what your passions are. Ignore all that stuff and just keep the same job. It wasn't uncommon for people to just do things that way before that counterculture movement was setting in. Like, people were just doing it that way. And like after the 60s, those people, who were young at that time, had my generation in like the 80s, 90s, they're our parents, so it's like, it's not like they're too far from that, but to some extent things did revert back to that: go to school, get a job, all that kind of stuff, and then I remember, around, was it 2008, when the economy crashed, and I saw a lot of my friends getting laid off and everything, but there wasn't really a whole like counterculture movement there. It was more so like everyone was going back to school or scrambling to get work or doing what they needed to kind of make things work out for their own independence. And within a few years, most people got settled back into kind of that whole like, okay, go to work, do your job, get ready to retire, or go back to school if you need more school, if you need more money. I mean, the people I was raised around, that was kind of just how it was, And then I knew some people that were friends that weren't really too much into the education side of things. They were more into like, not that people who are into education aren't into work, but they were into work, but they were, like they'd been working like in jobs that weren't like I don't know, like I don't really know how to explain it. Like they weren't like trying to go back to school or get to some other level with things. They were kind of just fine working what they were working, and that was fine. And I saw that kind of thing, and I kind of, I just saw it and just did with, just, I was like, if people seem happy, like, whatever, it's different when you see people are, like, struggling, and it's like, struggling with their, finances, or struggling with their mental health because of the finances or whatever it may be. But it's different when it's like, maybe somebody has a low pay rate job, but they're going and just doing it, and they're fine with it, and that's what they want to do. I see nothing wrong with that. But if somebody wants that change and maybe mentally they can't get there, or I've seen that more than anything, even within myself. It's like sometimes there's a change that you want, but mentally you've got to get past some hurdles to kind of like be able to do it, to do what you need to do, to go through all those steps and all the pain and discomfort involved, just to kind of get where you're trying to go. I've seen that before, and I've seen people become able to, work through the anxiety of it all, and slowly, by just immersing themselves or gradually exposing themselves to whatever it is that the anxiety is coming from, they're able to kind of get more and more comfortable getting into something that's going to work better towards what they want. But 2020 hits and all hell breaks loose. So many things were happening. I don't think anything has fully recovered from that yet. And so now we're in this place where, we've got a lot going on, guys. Like, we all know it. Even people who are doing well know that there's a lot going on. A lot of you know that, I do dabble in listening to like Dave Ramsey and his associates content, and with their books and everything. I find it to be valuable, and it's like easy to digest. Like, I'm not saying that everybody has to believe in it or do it exactly that way or whatever. But it's like, okay, if there's some science behind it and there's some, steps behind it that, it's proven methods, like a lot of brands don't have that. They don't have the proof behind them. They don't have the science behind them. And even if they do, they're not like evolving that much. Dave Ramsey in a way has like a small evolution with the times. Like it's not fully, like people mention like, oh, like, that $1,000, emergency fund, like maybe way back in the day that would have been significant, but now it's not because of inflation and like everything. And like people are kind of on his case about like, oh, maybe in like the 70s or 80s or whatever that would have been okay. But, it's kind of more of the point of like getting the small wins and having something set up. Like it's not necessarily the dollar amount. It's just how they talk about that a lot of people don't have $1,000. I know people making a lot of money, and there was a trip I was supposed to go on that I didn't go on. And when I told people that, for financially responsible reasons, I was just not going to go to this trip because it's just not good timing. If I wanted to spend like over $4,000, I could have done it another way. I just didn't feel comfortable with spending that much money this year on something that wasn't, it was, I don't know. It was hard for me to really, I'm really working on the financial part of things and being really strict with it. So it was really hard for me to kind of really want to do that. But then, I had family members who were like, oh, like, what if I could give you like, or I could only give you this amount of money if like, there were people offering me money, but I was like, not one person had more than like $1,000 to $2,000. I'm not saying that they needed to give me money. I wasn't asking. People were offering, and I was declining. I was like, I have my own money. I'm just deciding I cannot afford or do not want to afford to use my money for this type of thing. Like that's a lot of money, to pay over $2,000 just for a flight. And then you still have to be somewhere for a week in another country. That's not going to be cheap, it's not going to be free. You got to eat every day. You got to lodge every day. You're not just going to stay in like a hotel or Airbnb. You're going to go around and do stuff and pay for transportation and pay for events and maybe pay to eat takeout. It's not like I'm cooking in a hotel. You're paying for the food. So it's like, that's going to be a pricey trip. I'm not just going to go there and just not spend any money. And so I was like, that's not worth the money for me, because as much as I wanted to go, I was like, I wanted more to save the money. And so, when I heard people saying, oh, I could offer this much or I could offer that much, and then other family members were like asking other people, could they lend me, like they were trying to do this. I wasn't going to take the money. I wasn't going to let anybody pay. I didn't let anybody pay. I'm like, I have the money. I'm just not going. But other people who wanted me to go were like, oh, well, we can pay, or we can pay part of it. Not one person had $4,000 that they could pay. Not one person had over $2,000 that they could pay. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just saying, it's like, okay, if you don't have an extra $2,000 or an extra $1,000, like in my head, I'm like, and you want to take this trip, or they're like, oh, like, how about like $500, or like this person can maybe only lend you this much. And I wasn't trying to do that. Like they were doing this on their own, and I was just like, I'm just using that as an example. I'm like, a lot of people think this way, but my mindset has somewhat shifted. Like I spend money on things. I go to San Diego, I go to concerts, I go to music festivals, I go snowboarding. That's not free. It's not cheap. It costs me at least a few $100s, like quite a few $100s, like, like going to San Diego for like 3 nights is probably going to cost me, with a cheap hotel, about 300-ish for a hotel, and then about transportation can vary, but I would say if I took a bus or something like that, it's maybe like $40 round trip, $40-50 round trip, and then Ubering while I'm there, and then the food I have to eat while I'm there. You know, that's about as cheap as it'll get, you know. Let's call it 100 for food, 100 for transportation. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I'm just saying, like, what if that's the number? You know, that's already like 500 something bucks, you know, just for like 3 days. And so, you know, but I'm not really willing to do too much more than that. But like, if you think about also, you know, I paid for a ticket for something that's probably 200 to 300 almost, for whatever the concert is or whatever. And so it's like, you know, around 600 to like 800, you know, for something like that, you know. And even if I was driving a car down there, you know, that's still gas. You know, gas is going to run at least $60. And then driving around and paying for parking if I never Uber, that's a lot of money, you know what I mean? Like, it's not cheap, it's not free. So that's kind of how I see it. I'm like, yeah, it's doable, yeah, it's possible, but it's not cheap. But I'm willing to do that because it's something I want to do, and I have community there that I want to see. So for me, that's more worth it than taking a trip to see, you know, family that I don't really talk to, you know, spend a lot of money and, you know, a whole week. Some family members spent 2 weeks. I'm like, to me, that's like, yeah, it's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. It's not like you're doing it every other month or whatever, but it's like, that's a lot of money. You know, $4,000 is a lot of money. And the way I kind of see it is like, if other people don't have like a spare 250, a spare 500, a spare 1,000, I'm not saying I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're obligated to lend me money. I'm just saying if people don't have a spare amount of money, but they're still willing to spend like $4,000 on a trip like that, it's kind of like an interesting thing. And that's not too far from how a lot of people do things. You know, it feels better to spend money and, you know, be impulsive with spending. And I wouldn't call that really impulsive. Like, you know, if you're working and maybe you don't have more than $1,000, you know, and you only have $250 that you're willing to lend, you might still have more money. Like, there's a lot of variables here, but I mean, the reason why I'm mentioning it is it's just like kind of like a random example of, like, you know, a lot of times, you know, it's easy to make decisions that aren't based on financial goals. You know, I don't think anyone going on that trip was doing it as part of their financial planning. They were doing it as part of their leisure planning, right? But if I'm not in leisure plan mode, you know, I'm probably not going to be doing trips like that. But, you know, this year is a saving year for me, building and saving year for me. So I'm trying not to get too distracted. Like, I'm still going to have fun and do stuff, but to me, that would have been excessive. This isn't the right year for me to take a trip like that. I would very much rather spend $4,000 on my own projects than $4,000 on a trip, an international trip. So, you know, that's kind of where my mind is. It's like I'm more interested in building up my own things, but I'm kind of getting way off topic here, like, because I was mentioning Dave Ramsey and those the emergency fund, and that kind of came to my mind that a lot of people don't have that extra money. But that's another part of the problem too, though, when it comes to like an economic decline or some kind of crash. You know, a lot of people don't have that money. And I'm not trying to be like blame people for their own money problems, but it's like, I think there was something I did. I don't remember how long ago this was. It was sometime this summer. And I realized, I went and I had this one account where, I wasn't really doing like detailed math. Like Sundays are usually my budget day, but I wasn't doing too detailed of math for like a couple weeks, maybe like a month or so. I was just kind of like, I'm not really doing much, so I just kind of just didn't really check my budget or anything. But I remember I switched a lot of my subscriptions to come out of like, one of these accounts. Let's call it like Chime or like whatever account. There was like some account that I was like, oh, I have this card that I never use, but it's a free account, so let me just put the money in it for what I think I'm gonna need for these expenses. Like, because I was like tracking expenses, because I'm like, I know I have a lot of little expenses, but a lot of them were like subscriptions. And so I had put the money there for like the subscriptions, and I was like, man, I have a lot of, like, it added up to a lot, guys. It was like, if I think about like monthly stuff, so if it's like car insurance, that's not too pricey for me. Like, I'm paying, I don't know the exact number, but it's like under $30. My gym is like, let's call it $27. But already the two of those together are already almost $60. I'm like, and I'm not gonna cancel them, so there's that. There's I think at one time I was paying for Uber One or Uber Plus or whatever it's called, like the Uber subscription. That was like $9.99 a month. I think at the time YouTube was like $15.99 a month. I think it went up to $18.99 though. I think at the time Spotify was like, I can't remember if it was like $7.99 or $9.99 a month. I mean, almost every subscription was like $10 or $15. It's like, with the ones I already named, we're already near like $100 right there, just for like little stuff like that. And like, I'm not trying to like blame people, but I'm like, sometimes it's like, well, if you have YouTube, you could kind of make it work. Like, you could make playlists on YouTube and not have to use Spotify and pay for Spotify. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, I've done that before, when it's like, I don't want to pay for it this month. I won't pay for Spotify, so I'll make some music lists on YouTube. Like, it takes more effort. You have to go in and like find it, and like, but if you're paying for like YouTube Premium and you don't have commercials and stuff, you can get music videos and make the music videos like a whole playlist. Like, it does take a little more time. It's a little more, that's not really what that app is for. But I mean, like, and music videos, sometimes they have like these weird like trailers and these weird little like pauses and stuff, versus the song that might just get straight to the point. Like, sometimes there's some theatrical parts of the music video, so it's like, if you're just trying to rock out, and then like, say if you're watching a music video like Thriller or something like that, or something that has like parts in it where like the musicians are like walking around and talking to people and doing all kinds of stuff, where you're just like, in the song it's not like that, on the album version. That's the music video version. So stuff like that can get annoying. But it is an option. You can do something like that. It's not like impossible. It's just the platform isn't really made for people to be like, I mean, it's a video platform, so it's not really made for people to be just necessarily sitting and listening to music. But I do understand they do have like a music YouTube has like a music subsetting, or whatever you want to call it now. I don't really know. I've never really like looked at it yet, but yeah, I'm mentioning all that because it's like, I know that money's tight for people, but a lot of times there are things that people can change. Like, I don't I shouldn't eat fast food, but I don't completely avoid it. And I started noticing after a while, I was like, it's actually cheaper to eat In-N-Out than it is to eat McDonald's or KFC or any of these other places. It's like Del Taco and In-N-Out are cheaper than McDonald's. Like, how is that, possible? You can get fries and a cheeseburger at In-N-Out for under $7. You can't get a Big Mac combo for under $7. But it does come with a drink. But it's like just things like that. It's like little things. Like when you think of all the things that add up, like I would have never thought that I was paying over $100 in subscriptions. Just by the way it looks, it's like, it's not like that much money. But if I add like car insurance and like the gym and then all the other little subscriptions, it's like, yeah, that's like over $100. Because there's some stuff sometimes it's like, I didn't know I was paying for Audible. I didn't know I was paying for, Amazon Prime. Like there's stuff that's like I just overlooked. And it's like, I slowly went through and canceled a bunch of stuff because I was like, I don't really need to be paying for this stuff monthly. I'd rather pay the extra fee for the one thing I buy a month on Amazon Prime than pay the monthly, I feel like the extra fee that I'm paying is going to be less money than the Amazon Prime. Like, I don't really watch the movies on there that much, and my mom has it anyways, and it's like, there's just things like that where I'm like, if a lot of times if people really, 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 really want to save, and a lot of people might have nothing. A lot of people might have absolutely zero. They don't have any luxury, any subscriptions, anything like that. But a lot of people have them, but nobody wants to part with them because of the convenience. But there is sometimes a workaround. And so for people who are struggling with that stuff financially, that's one big thing to look at. Like you could easily find $100 just by canceling them. It can be a painful process, but it's also a painful process to be dealing with debt. And so sometimes it's like, but it's just so hard though, because they're all at our fingertips, and all you got to do is press a button and you have something luxurious and cool that you can just entertain yourself with. And I do the same thing. I'm not trying to tell people they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, it's a choice. Everyone has to make their own choices. And but yeah, when it comes to like finances and all that kind of stuff, that has become like one of the biggest worries for a lot of people. And what's been happening with these counterculture movements lately is, people waking up more, and other people kind of more in a process of challenging universities, right? So people are challenging universities. I think the first place I saw this, I don't know for sure, but I think the first place I saw this was with that movie Borrowed Future. Now, I paid for that on YouTube before it was free, and it's one of those Ramsey-related projects about student loan debt. So right now, I think it's really popular. So if you want to watch that, it's a really popular. You can find it free on YouTube right now. I think the whole documentary, you can watch it, and basically it talks in detail about student loan debt and kind of the reality of it. Like when you're starting college, you don't normally know that much about money because most of us aren't taught that much about money. We're usually maybe taught, I think in school I was taught how to write checks. I think we learned that. I think we learned how to make like a balance sheet on like something like Excel. Like so you could see like, expenses and profit, and just kind of like you add money here, you take money out there. Like I think there was like a math class or some portion of like an economics class or something that had to do with like how to write a check, like how to I think I learned how to balance a bank book from my mom. Like she's the one who took us to get our first bank accounts as kids, and we had I don't even know if they do this anymore, give you that little bank book, and then like I would write in it like how much I spent and how much I had and all that kind of stuff. And it was, I first got a bank kind of before ATMs were everywhere. So I remember when I first got a debit card, you weren't really able to like use them everywhere like that, or you'd get cash out, and sometimes it would charge you extra money, and all that kind of stuff. But like, you weren't always able to use debit cards all the time. Nowadays, people have all kinds of methods, but I remember back then, some places, especially some mom and pop shops, like they would be cash only and stuff like that. And I remember at sometimes like shopping with friends when I was like in early teenage years, and them writing checks like at Target or something like that. Like, I've hardly used a checkbook. I think I've used checkbooks for paying rent. That's the most of what I've used a checkbook for. I don't think I've hardly paid any other things in a check. Hardly ever. Checks kind of became almost like obsolete. All the digital stuff became more popular. And now you just pay everything pre-subscribed, like on your own apps and stuff. And so it's like, things have definitely changed, even in like a couple decades, and then within the last few years. But I've definitely noticed people having to change habits, myself included, like just having to make those choices. I'd really love to go to Hollywood and visit some of my friends, but I know how much the gas is going to cost to and from. And then if we're going to eat dinner, I know how much that's going to cost, and it's like, is it really worth all those hours and all that money just to go out for like some steak or pasta or sushi or drinks or whatever it is? Sometimes I'm like, I'd rather keep my $50-$60, and that's like on the low side if you're not paying like expensive parking and stuff, like. But yeah, I've definitely noticed, that when it comes to, things like, the new challenge against universities, people are looking at the amount of debt, and it's like, the amount of debt people come out with is significant. I've got friends $500,000 in debt for pursuing, medical degrees, doctorates. They can pay it off if they start their career by paying it off. They will be able to pay it off if they don't just like level up their life right away and start accruing way more expenses, buying a house, buying a car, starting to have all these payments, and now they're not going to have the money coming in to pay it off. But if they still kind of stay at their same rate of living for a while, they'll be able to pay it off probably in a couple years. Let's say if they're making $100K a year, $150K a year, they could live off of like $50K a year now, with two people living in an apartment or something, or in a house. Usually an apartment. I don't have that many friends with houses, honestly. I have like one friend who has a house, and I know a lot of people, and I have one friend who has a house. Everyone else has apartments out here, so or condos. I have like two friends with condos, one friend with a house. Everybody else has apartments, and then other people live with either roommates or family. Some people aren't even paying rent, and they're still having a hard time. It's like, it's rough. SoCal is rough. But I've noticed that people are challenging university systems. They're like, people pay all this money, and there are all these other alternative types of programs that are like trade schools, boot camps. I remember way back, you guys probably remember this, like way back, DeVry Institute and ITT Tech, those were kind of popular. I don't know their job placement rate. I think I knew a friend that went through DeVry, and then I knew other friends who went through just some other types of programs. But the people that I saw being the most successful weren't necessarily the people who went to school the most. It kind of just depended what field they were in. Like with my group of friends, the people who I'm seeing as, the fastest successful people, I think, went into like some form of engineering, and out of a bachelor's degree were usually able to get a pretty high paying job. And in addition to that, I saw, friends go through nursing programs and become RNs. That was really intensive and fast paced. But they, pretty much an equivalent of like a bachelor's and some extra training for nursing, and they were able to work and make a very good living at a very good career. The people I know in psychology, the ones who got licensed, they had a longer route because a lot of them had to get masters, and then just barely, like, within the last 1 to 2 years, most of them got licensed. So now a lot of them are making at least 60K, some of them closer to 80K, not having private practices. And then I know a few friends with doctorates that none of my friends with doctorates yet are fully situated because they're either brand new with their doctorate, or postdoc or some other kind of thing. I'm not saying they're not gonna make it work. I'm just talking about what I've seen with my own eyes as far as like I feel like they're gonna be stable in their situation, but it's a long game, So I feel like the shorter game of people that went to 4-year universities, it was mostly engineering and nursing. People who went to the military, they seem to have been more situated than a lot of other people I saw who went to school for like, degrees in the humanities, all kinds of other degrees. Where it's like if they didn't want to be a professor or go back and get a master's, that bachelor's degree wasn't really going to get them, a job. Like I've seen a lot of people going into like graphic design. Like I know, at least I used to know a lot of people who worked for like video game companies and those types of tech companies. But yeah, like I always thought it was it's interesting how a lot of us are taught, go to school, do this, and right now what's happening, I don't know if I'd specifically call it counterculture, but people are really kind of trying to figure out, what they want to do with jobs, and with training to get jobs. Like right now, that's kind of the popular conversation is like, is it worth it? Is it worth it to go to these 4-year universities, these more year universities, more than 4 years? Is it worth it? I think a lot less people are applying, and I've seen a lot of schools, even in like psychology, dropping their expectations, like for the GRE, and dropping some things that were standard, that they're like, well, we need more applicants, and so to get that money from the applicants, they're like, well, you don't have to have the GRE, you don't have to have this or that. There's a lot of schools that are like waiving that now, which in my era, that was not a thing. You had to have those test scores, and they had to be good. Like, schools I got declined from, it was literally because of some scores like that. Like, I interviewed at Vanderbilt, and it was literally me or this other person, and they took them because their GRE score was higher. And they were calling me back and forth, just kind of like, okay, would you be okay with this? Like, would this kind of lab be okay with you? And they were talking to the other person individually by phone too, like trying to see which of us was the candidate they were going to choose, because they couldn't pick everybody. But they went with the other person, and when I asked them specifically why, they were like, yeah, it was because the GRE scores, like they couldn't pass them over when we were pretty equivalent on everything. My GRE scores were good, but my verbal was way better than wait, was it the other way around? No, I think my math was way better than my verbal, maybe. I can't remember. It was something. One of them was way higher. Like, my score overall was where it needed to be, but because one area was way higher than the other, they'd rather have it be even and lower than such a big spread between. So, yeah, like, that was a thing then. I'm wondering if it's going to continue to be a thing now. Because these schools need students to be able to survive at the level that they were. Professors need students in their classes. Class sizes need to be a certain size for them to be able to get paid a certain amount of money. It's becoming a bit of a mess, but I do think that there was some form of an abuse of that system for a while now, which is kind of coming to light more. So people are kind of right now kind of debating, do I really want to go into that much debt when there's another way? Like, do I want to go to the prestigious university or the private university that costs way more? Or do I want to go to the one that's cheaper, but I'll still get the same degree? Like, people are having to make these decisions now. And I feel like in my lifetime, I'd never really heard people making these decisions too much. I'd seen the opposite, where it's like, it didn't matter how much schools costed. When people were having trouble with work, they went back to school. And now I'm seeing people coming out of high school being like, I don't know if it's going to be worth it to go into school, but it is still kind of like, a thing where in society, if you have a bachelor's or a master's, you might be more considered more eligible for some jobs. And then some people debate saying that, are you really more eligible? Because all the people who got out of high school and went into like a trade program or went into some direct training, in like an internship or what do you call it? Like an apprenticeship type of training. It's like they're learning the job. They're not so focused on this like social experience or so focused on this other thing, like the experience of colleges and universities and dorm life and all that stuff. They're just like focused on the job. And I have friends who are like electricians. I've known people who went to these schools to get some kind of like training to like work on motherboards for computers and stuff. And they basically learn skills to do a job, and then they do the job. It might be like a $5,000 training that you can get a grant for, like trucking and stuff like that. You get the job, you do the job, you can be making six figures within a few years without the $500,000 to $250,000 debt that a lot of people have once they get a bachelor's, but then maybe they don't have a whole lot of experience, versus someone who spent like 2 years from the age of 18 to 20 learning a job, working on the job, getting paid something for doing that work. It's just people are trying to make these decisions. I'm not really gonna say one thing or the other is better. Like, they both have costs and benefits, because degrees are still considered valuable nowadays. And so if you don't get a degree, that could sometimes put someone at a disadvantage at times, and then other times maybe not. But when it comes to, the satisfaction in these areas of work, I think that's what it's all coming down to, is like, well, people have all these other financial burdens, these other expenses, these loans they've got to pay back, and with all this current stuff with student debt interest repayments starting, and student loan payments starting back up and stuff, it's like, I think a lot of us saw our credit scores increase when we got that $10,000 kind of knocked out, and then now it's like that's really going to impact people's credit scores if they don't figure that out quick, because they're going to now have an extra debt that they have to pay that they haven't been having to account for years at this point. And so what makes somebody even satisfied with their job? It's like, if you can't pay your bills and live your life the way that you want to live, it's going to be kind of hard to like your job. If your job leaves you too depleted, even if the money is good, it's going to be kind of hard to like your job. So usually it's this fine line between, do I still have energy for my loved ones, myself, my family, and friends at the end of my work day, or during my free time on the weekends, or when I'm, not working? Or do I just have to sleep all weekend because I'm so exhausted? Or is it getting in the way of like forming and starting and keeping relationships? People care about their relationships. For me, I don't like how the economy has impacted me socially, because I can't just go to Hollywood and go grab some steak dinners a couple nights a week. I can't just go down to San Diego when I feel like it and go do this and that when I want. There's a process. There's, some thought that has to go into it. There's finances that have to be considered. I can't just it's not like before where it was like cheap to just go out of town for a weekend real quick within 100 miles away and just get a hotel real quick, stay there, chill, have fun, have friends over, use the pool, party a little bit, go out to a bar or club, come back, and still having hardly spent any money. It's like nowadays it's like the hotel itself, the food itself, the Ubers themselves, everything costs a lot more than what it did. And so, I'm not just going to go do it just because it's the weekend. It's like, now it's like, well, if there's not an event that has tickets that I already paid for, I'm probably not just going to go do that. There were times where I took trips just to like a little staycation by myself, in the city where I lived, just to get away from housemates and be out of town for a 3-day weekend and chill in a hotel that was like 5 miles from the house, just because I had space to myself that way. And it's like, to me, that was fun, and it was affordable, and it was a good time. And now it's like, I'm not going to pay to do that, hotels cost more. The food I'm going to be having to use costs more. It all costs more. So I'll stay home, and I feel like a lot of people are experiencing that same thing. So I think what a lot of people are kind of dealing with is, that fine line between like, where's my energy going? Is it all going to a job that, at the end of the day, I'm still having to decide if I can still subscribe to everything I want. I'm still having to decide if I can go to every social event that I want, but I'm still working my butt off and don't have any energy to or money extra to spend. Or maybe I have the energy but no money to spend extra, or maybe I have no energy but the money to spend this extra. I have plenty of money but no energy, so to me, I see that seems to be one of the major things, is like the whole back and forth between those, the energy and the money. Do I have money? Do I have energy? People work so they can pay for what they want, either immediately or in the future. And if you can't get there, then why work for a certain place. So people don't want to work for places where they don't feel like they're getting what they want out of it, either at the job or outside of the job. And people also don't want to work for things the other way around, where it's like, yeah, you give me all the money in the world, but I have no energy to even spend it the way I want. So it's the values aspect. But that's it for now. We're going to keep going in this direction, guys, and thanks for listening.